It's time for the whole 9 yards. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ralph Ventre, back in the NEC Front Row Studio for Week 4 of the football season. And what a week this could be. Some awesome matchups highlighting the docket. 2 games against FBS members, 2 games against Ivy Leaguers. We have our first conference contest of 2019. Duquesne and Dayton, Brown and Bryant, RMU, VMI. Plenty of reasons to watch in Week 4. Sizzling hot matchups to tackle. Let's get to it in the opening drive. We'll start in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Central Connecticut State will put its 3-0 record on the line against EMU. It's the 3rd year in a row the Blue Devils will take on a member of the Football Bowl subdivision, and this one will no doubt be its toughest test to date. Eastern Michigan coming off a huge win over Big Ten member Illinois. Mike Glass threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in that one. So the Central defense will have its hands full, but the offense can help alleviate some of that pressure by establishing the run. CCSU is one of the top teams in the FCS when it comes to running the ball. We'll have more on that later in the show. It's been a product of an experienced offensive line, a dual-threat quarterback, some young, exciting ball carriers. They'll look to continue that success as they step up in class against Eastern Michigan. Wagner also steps up to the FBS in Week 4. The Seahawks travel to Boca Raton to face Florida Atlantic University. This is a Wagner team that took UConn down to the wire in Week 1, but a Wagner team that is also still searching for its first win. The Seahawks were tripped up in Week 3 at Stony Brook. 2 of the key reasons for that setback were 2 costly fumbles, as well as a pass defense that allowed more than 25 yards per completion. In addition to improving in those 2 areas, here's what head coach Jason Hoteling is looking for from his team on the trip to Florida.
Just go down there and compete, just like every other game. Again, it's within these first 4 weeks. We've always talked, the whole year, just like I just got done saying. It's about sharpening the sword for league play, and but once we kick off, it's a competition, and everybody in our program will tell you that. And we go down there and we expect to play hard and compete against these guys.
Well, I teased this one at the top of the show. Let's dive right into the Ocean State Showdown that will take place in Smithfield, Rhode Island. Bryant hosting Ivy League member Brown. Now, the Bulldogs lost a tough one last week at home against Fordham. Took a lead into the 4th quarter before the Rams put together a late-game blitz that ended in a 29-14 final. Not to be overlooked, though, was the play of Bryant's pass defense in that setback to Fordham. They held the Rams under 200 yards through the air and under 50% completion percentage. The defense also had 4 sacks on the quarterback. And here's what head coach Chris Merritt thinks about that performance, as well as what the Bulldogs must do moving forward.
Look at old film and look at personnel. Get an idea of what they do. Offensively, I think we just have to come out and play out of the stuff that we're best at. It doesn't matter if it's Brown, Fordham, or Albany or Stony Brook. We've got to play within our offense and within our strengths. Defensively, I think that there's a strong idea of what he's going to do on offense at Brown. But sometimes too much information is not a good thing either. So they just need to be consistent, play sound, come out and establish our brand of football.
Now out to Ohio we go, where Duquesne will play for the second week in a row. Dukes coming off a setback at Youngstown State in week 3. They'll look to right the ship against a familiar opponent, an annual rival, the Dayton Flyers. The Dukes have won the last 3 games in this series, 4 of the last 5, and they could be looking for their run game to carry them back in the win column. Robert Morris had some success running the ball against Dayton last week. Elijah Jackson went over 100 yards. And as everyone knows, Duquesne has A.J. Hines in the backfield, the senior All-American, averaging more than 6 yards per carry in 2 career appearances against the Flyers. The annual battle between Duquesne and Dayton, live from Welcome Stadium on Saturday on Facebook. As we do every week, we check in on reclassifying NEC member Merrimack. The Warriors, after back-to-back road games against NEC teams, well, they return home and they look to rediscover the win column. The opponent is Mayville State of the NAIA, and the road team is going to have to contend with a playmaking Merrimack defense. In each of their past 2 games, the Warriors have returned an interception for a touchdown. They'll look for their second home win of the season. Merrimack, Mayville State, live on NEC Front Row. Down to Lexington, Virginia, where the Robert Morris Colonials will visit VMI. RMU kicking off a 4-game road swing with this one. The Colonials are still searching for their first win of the season, but they have plenty of positives to pull from last week's game against Dayton. A 34-31 setback, but sophomore quarterback George Martin had his best day in a Robert Morris uniform. He went for a career-high 282 yards through the air, helped out by a big performance from senior tight end Matthew Gonzalez. The 2018 All-American tallied 124 receiving yards and a touchdown. Robert Morris will look to unleash him as well as make some hay with its ground game. Elijah Jackson, another 100-yard performance against Dayton, and he'll look to keep it moving against VMI, the second ever meeting between Robert Morris and Virginia Military Institute. The Colonials took the first game between the two, 23-0, back in 2017. You can watch the 2019 version of this battle on ESPN+. Like Bryant, St. Francis is also hosting an Ivy League member in Week 4. Following the home opener last week against Merrimack, a 42-14 victory, the Flash are back at the Goal Field, taking on Columbia in what is the season opener for the Lions. These teams have only met once before, a 13-9 road win for SFU back in 2016. Now, one thing to watch on the St. Francis side in this game is the continued development of quarterback Jason Brown. The sophomore has 2 games in which he exceeded 270 pass yards this year. He threw an early pick 6 last week, but bounced back with 3 touchdown passes, and he's established quite a connection with receiver E.J. Jenkins. Jenkins has a TD reception in each of the season's first 3 games. Now, as for SFU head coach Chris Valerio, here's what he expects to see from the Lions and his own club as the two teams square off in Week 4 on Front Row.
This is a very good football program coming in here. They're very disciplined, strong, physical. They like to impose their will on you. So, it's going to be a great challenge for us. It's the first time they've come here. So, we're looking forward to keep improving. That's something that I talked early in the year about. People ask me, what do you want to see? We want to keep improving and worry about playing our style of football, and everything else will take care of itself.
Our final game on the opening drive is the first Northeast Conference contest of the season. Sacred Heart visiting Long Island University. Now, this is a special day for LIU. Not only is it the team's home opener, but it's its first ever conference game as an FCS program. Now, the Sharks will be well rested for this one. They've played only once in the season's first 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Sacred Heart, coming off back-to-back victories over Patriot League members Bucknell and Lafayette, they scored 44 points per game in those wins. The offense is clicking, but it'll go up against an LIU defense that did some good things in a Week 2 setback at South Dakota State. And you have to think that LIU will be eager to get out and play in front of its home crowd, and you can watch it happen on NEC Front Row. Let's check in on the NEC stock market. I'll tell you whose value is all the way up. Now, for the second straight week, I'll focus in on a Sacred Heart offensive playmaker. Back in Week 3, it was running back Julius Chestnut. This week, it's first-year starting quarterback Logan Marchi. The Temple transfer has been on fire. He accounted for the NEC's first 300-yard passing day in Week 2. 1 week later, he produced the league's first 400-yard passing performance of the season. It's the first time that Marchi has reached the 300-yard mark since 2017, when he went over 300 yards in back-to-back weeks as Temple's quarterback in games against UConn and ECU. In the last 2 games, Marchi, 43 of 69 passing, 723 yards. And here's the most impressive stat: 9 touchdowns and no interceptions in back-to-back victories. Logan Marchi, the Sacred Heart quarterback, his stock is all the way up. I'm calling the Twitter timeout. Let's take a look at the tweet sheet. This week's featured tweet comes from Dan Fapiano. He covers CCSU football, and he pointed out that the Blue Devils had 2 defensive touchdowns heading into last week's game against Valpo, and they did it again. Blue Devils with defensive touchdowns in each of their first 3 games. Only 2 teams in the FCS have scored at least 3 defensive touchdowns this season. They would be CCSU and Villanova. So the Blue Devils' playmaking defense has caught the attention of Dan Fapiano, and rightfully so. That's amazing, bro. What has me in a state of amazement this week? Well, it's the CCSU Blue Devils again. I talked about the 3 defensive touchdowns in our Twitter timeout segment. Now, let's switch it over to the other side of the ball, where CCSU's experienced offensive line has been mauling opponents thus far this season. The Blue Devils' run game has been in high gear since the season's start. They are averaging 7.4 yards per rush attempt. That is number 1 in the football championship subdivision. When it comes to rush yards per game average, CCSU 281.3 yards per game. That number is 5th best amongst FCS team leaders. Well, what's contributing to all of this success in the run game? Well, of course, it's the offensive line, but then there also is a dual threat quarterback in Aaron Winchester. He's rushed for more than 250 yards in the season's first 3 games. And then there's some young, dynamic talent in that backfield. Just take a look at Keontae Lucas, 190 yards on only 10 carries in the Week 3 road win over Valpo. CCSU run game is getting it done. 7.4 yards per carry, more than 280 yards per game. Stats amazing. And now it is time to take a look at the NEC landscape alongside Rick Saratella of NFL Draft Bible. It's the weekly version of the NEC Football Chop Shop. Just some initial thoughts as we move on from Week 3 and into Week 4 of the FCS football season.
As we get ready to approach the in-conference schedule, I think we're starting to see who might be contenders, who might be pretenders. Of course, the conference schedule will play that all out, but I think, just keeping tabs on this thing, hitting the road each week and keeping tabs on my NEC Twitter feed. Logan Marchi, big performance out of him. Senior experience there, showing his leadership, 300-plus yards this week. I think the first 300-yard passer of the conference. And then on the defensive side, Giovanni Sanders, the sophomore corner out of St. Francis, 2 picks on the day, creating turnovers. So, call the mariachi band. We got a Giovanni. We got a Ventre. Hey, I'm ready to dig in and feast on this NEC Week 4 now we're heading into.
Yeah, now Sacred Heart's a team that ran the ball really well last year, number 1 in the NEC in rushing yards per game. And they've had some success against Bucknell as well in Week 2 with Julius Chestnut. So they've shown that they can run it. And now Marchi has really added a big-time threat with the passing offense, and Kezio Snelling, wide receiver, and then this freshman Tyrese Chambers, who stepped up. He has over 200 yards combined in the last 2 weeks. So Sacred Heart can ground and pound. They can open it up and air it out a little bit. So an exciting way for them to rebound from a season-opening loss against Maine. Back-to-back wins, as you mentioned, and we'll see where that goes. They have their first conference game against LIU this week, and that will be LIU's first ever Northeast Conference contest. So LIU Sacred Heart, I'm sure you'll be taking a look at that one at some point, Rick. And I know there's at least one other game on the card that intrigues you. But what do you got for a Sacred Heart LIU?
I'm keeping my eye here on Eastern Michigan coming to play Central Connecticut State. And, Eastern Michigan, the big win this past week, 3rd year in a row with a win in the Big Ten. And now they take on Central Connecticut State. Big test, big time matchup here for new head coach Ryan McCarthy, who, as you know, takes over for Pete Rossamato, who went to Rutgers. And all of a sudden you look up, CCSU 3-0 for the first time since 1973, Ralph. I mean, we were just twinkles in the sky at that point. So CCSU is off to a hot start. Of course, the hard-hitting kicker Francis Cole with the back-to-back last-second field goals to get them off, the first 2 weeks over Fordham and Merrimack. And, he may play in New Britain, but he's from Queens. He's showing his late-season heroics and grittiness down the stretch. But quarterback Aaron Winchester is a guy now that's kind of popped up on my radar, the transfer from Georgia State, as I get to learn more about him. The dual-threat quarterback now, 4 passing touchdowns, touchdown on the ground, almost 500 yards passing, 250 yards rushing. So Eastern Michigan is going to have their hands full trying to stop this young man. We talked about our top NEC performers this past week. How about sophomore running back Keontae Lucas coming off a big week? He now has 250 rushing yards on the season. He's averaging 12 yards per carry. And overall, we talked about Javon Brown. Overall, the offensive line is getting the job done as well because they're averaging 7.4 yards per carry on the season. So they're running the ball at 7.5 yards per clip. If I'm CCSU, hey, I'm just running until you stop it because every 2 plays is a first down. And then defensively, always been a big fan of this Tajik Bagley back there in the secondary. He's making plays all over the field again, 16 tackles. He's already got a pick. He's returning kicks. So he might even catch the eye now of some of the NFL evaluators as the season progresses. And one other guy I'm keeping an eye on is Trey Jones, the outside linebacker, providing a little bit of pass rush there on the edge.
As always, Rick, it's a pleasure chopping it up with you, and many more to come. Week 4 down, but 9 more to go.
Let's do it.
All right. Rick Saratella from NFL Draft Bible. I'm Ralph Ventre. This was the weekly Chop Shop on the whole 9 yards. So there you have it, folks. We ran down all 8 games for you. Now it's your turn to go out and enjoy some NEC football in week 4. Brown and Bryant, St. Francis and Columbia. You can catch both of those games on NEC Front Row. Merrimack, Mayville State, that will be on NEC Front Row as well. And don't forget to download the NEC On The Run app for iOS, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Android too. For week 4 of the whole 9 yards, I'm Ralph Ventre. Thank you for watching NEC Front Row.